Hello there, you're about to watch the extended version of my interview with Judd Winick, author, illustrator, and star of The Real World San Francisco. This is part of my larger video about Pedro Zamora and The Real World, and for more about that video and for interviews with other folks involved in the production, check the links in the description. Now, on with the interview with Judd. All right, Judd, thanks so much for chatting with me. Let me just have you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Judd Winick. I'm a cartoonist and a former cast member on Real World San Francisco back in 1994.
So, when you applied to the show, had you watched the first two seasons? What were you expecting from the experience?
I had watched it religiously. I was probably the only one in my cast who was like a huge fanboy of the show. I thought it was fun. This is for those playing at home, this is the third season. So I'd watched the New York season and the LA season. And I thought it was going to be a stupid good time. That's why I wanted to do it. I didn't think it was going to be kind of a life-changing experience in in the way that it was. Again, I thought it at worst, I'd get to be on TV and that was cool. At best, it might help me find work. At really best, maybe I'd find a girlfriend. These are the things I was thinking about. And again, it was supposed to be like a stupid good time.
What was your impression? There's this great moment where we see you meet Pedro and shake his hand. What was your first impression when you met him?
Oh, let's be honest. That is the very first day we're doing the show. We're like a couple of hours in. So it's insane. So we're there and we're talking and there's six camera people surrounding us. You know, two big guys with cameras and there's boom mics and there's people walking around. Don't pay attention to the cameras. Don't pay attention to the cameras. And you are struggling at first just to do that, just to be normal and acknowledge that this is like, yeah, we're going to pretend that these people aren't here and we're going to ignore the cameras. So that's going on. And it's a bit surreal. But within that, I'm just trying to take it all in. Like, okay, here's this guy. And he right off the bat, he's very sweet. He's very, very nice, very like fun, like super relaxed. If anything, that's what struck me about him more than the rest of us, is that he had he had a better energy about himself that I thought he wasn't playing to the cameras or anything about that, but he just seemed not like chill. That's the wrong word. Just like engaged in like talking to all of us in like a real way. And I thought like, oh, like, you know, I was struck how super charming he was and shockingly good looking. Because he looked good on TV, but as anyone who meets people who are on TV, he looked better in person. It was like, wow, okay, you're quite photogenic. Yeah.
Did finding out about his HIV status, did that affect your feelings about being in the house, living with him, being his roommate?
Yes and no. It was something I would have to reflect upon later. I'd say that, to be honest, because we're being filmed and because I was conscious of the fact that I didn't want to come off like an asshole. I just that you know your reactions are somewhat muted. I mean, in life, I don't think I would have like hopped out of my skin or something. And we knew that we were living with someone who was HIV positive. So finding out that was Pedro, it was something like, oh, okay, it's him. All right. Um, and I was conscious of it later that I was a little crestfallen because I hadn't thought about it in this. The truth was, when I was thinking about living with someone who was HIV positive, in my head, it was like I was living with someone like the HIV virus walking around on two legs. I was gonna be like living with the AIDS virus. I know, and I mean that like in the most metaphorical sense that, you know, without even being conscious of it. But like many people who saw him on TV for the first time, suddenly this was a person. Suddenly this had a face. And in the couple of hours that I was talking and hanging out with him, I liked him quite a bit. And now I find out that he's HIV positive. And it's like, oh, okay, it's Pedro. Okay. And I wasn't terribly nervous, but I think even before I had time to process any anxiety around it, a word we use now, not a word you use then, Pedro knew. He was an AIDS educator and a really good one. So he was aware that all of us were going to be a little bit nervous or a lot nervous or terrible. He knew it could be the gamut. So he was ready. So very quickly, he wanted to get the cat out of the bag. He broke out this gigantic scrapbook he had of himself. And all you had to do is thumb through it. And there it was, Pedro Zamora, AIDS educator, and like big articles and like, it was filled. And in this way, it's like, this is who I am. This is what I do. And then later, he would slip things into conversation very early on about casual contact. Now you don't get HIV through casual contact and what that means. So we were lucky in that way that he wanted to set us at ease. He understood. He was very young, but he's very worldly and also, again, like a really good educator. So what began with educating us is what later would be, he's educating the cameras. It was twofold.
I read that in one of these books it has his application, the letter that he wrote initially, and he talks about his mission for being on the show. Educating people starting in the house and then, broadly, ideally, millions of people who are watching.
Yeah, it was, he had an agenda. I mean, it's a word we use now and a word we didn't use then. This is what he wanted to do. I mean, it has the benefit of being earnest and heartfelt and important to him. It wasn't about like, I want to be famous or something. Like, no, he wants to do this. He wants people to understand what it's like to live his life. He understood that almost no one had really met someone who was living with AIDS before, not in a real way. And with that, I don't think he even understood what an enormous impact he could and would have. But it was something he wanted to do, and it began with us. And so I was quickly at ease with that because it was sort of like an acknowledgement that he knew what we knew and what we were feeling. And I'm going to help you all, deal with this. And that was literally how it started. And then as the days turned into weeks, into months, we became friends. We all became friends.
Do you remember how much he talked during filming about his mission for being on the show? Like, was he very open about why he wanted to do it?
No, not like that. It was never, well, we didn't talk about the show. I mean, that was like, there's a line in the sand, literally, that don't talk about the fact that you're doing a television show. When you talk about it, you call it the project. And even when we called it the project, they would cut it out. It was just supposed to be like the cameras are a fly on the wall and they're not even there. We're pretending it's not even happening. So the idea of discussing that this is an important thing to do, and what's needed. And we talked about it a bunch later, in a fun way, because we were starting to get excited because we sort of felt, at one point, when we'd sort of settled in and we were having a good time. And this was just going to be our lives for the next 6 months. Then we get excited. And then, then when the cameras were away became, like the fun teasing about it. Like, you're going to be huge. It's going to be big. You're going to be friends with Elton John. Like, I don't think you're totally going to be friends with Elton John. I can't imagine you won't. Like, shit like that. We would talk about it like that. Not in, because I mean, again, we have the hindsight of how horrible it all ended, that we lost him and lost him too soon. Before that, it was fun. It was so much fun. It was fun because we were doing this together. We enjoyed each other's company. We were going to be on TV, and that was cool. And we also felt like what Pedro was experiencing and doing, and they're showing like, also, he fell in love and we loved Shawn and we had the commitment ceremony. These were all good times. It was all like, I mean, yeah, we threw Puck out of the house and that was a big pain in the ass, which that happened a lot quicker than they showed on television. Like they made it kind of like in the middle of the season, and it happened like a couple of months in. It was like a much shorter amount of time. But it was more fun than anything else. So there wasn't a lot of discussion about what he was trying to accomplish. I mean, we knew that, but it was sort of like, yeah, it's happening and he will, and people get to see what we see. they'll get to know him. We think, we hope.
I want to actually ask you some more about that because, it's very easy to focus on the drama and, the tragedy and all that stuff, but also, there's this beautiful portrait of his, this man's complete life and, not just with the AIDS education, but dating and romance and going on a vacation. And what are some of the moments that stick in your mind that were fun, just hanging out and having a good time?
That was most of it. I mean, that's, uh, I mean, there's like, again, like big ticket items, like we had a commitment ceremony, he and Shawn, like that was a blast. We were, and we worked hard and, and there was food to prepare and people to invite. And like, that was fun. And we got to fucking go to Hawaii and that was a blast. And it's like, I mean, I'm 24 years old and broke. Pedro had more or less barely left Miami. So going to Hawaii was like going to the moon. And Pam as well, like her family growing up, like crazy frugal, like they didn't go on like fancy vacations. She talked about it like, our entire lives together had been like, they drove places, like went to the Grand Canyon, we drove there. So when we went to Hawaii, it was a blast. But more than anything else, it was just like the little stuff. I mean, it's like crap I put in the book. Like Pedro and I discovered he liked Star Trek: The Next Generation. So like, oh, we're gonna watch Star Trek a lot, and talk about it and be nerds. Like, oh, you're kind of nerdy. I didn't realize that. I am too. We didn't know that. You know, the basis of being friends with someone is never it's never the large yes. It's never the giant things. The giant things are helpful. And you talk about those big experiences you have with the people that you love and the friends that become family because of, how they carry you through life and how you do it together. But what makes you family is like, the little things, dropping somebody off at the airport, which I did. I had a car. I took, when Pedro had to go, when he went to Florida, we was going to Washington for this, that. I drove him to the airport, um, you know, crap like that. Um, you know, the fact that he had like shitty or non-existent taste in music just appalled me. Um, you know, uh, joking with him, like now and again, like music would come up. Like he didn't know show tunes. Like I'm the one telling a gay man about musical theater, which I even joked to him about. Like, this is shameful that you don't know this. Like come now, come now. So it's those dumb things. And also like the three or four of us, like me and Pam and Pedro and Corey, um, you know, a good time is like, let's go eat. Let's go do something. And you do it together. And it's less about what you're doing than if we're just doing it together. And we were legitimately friends. We were really, um, it's why, it's why the heartbreak is still real, because here we are over 30 years later. And we know that he would still be part of our chosen family. And the experiences we're having now and hardships we're having now and hardships he might be having now, he'd still be part of that. Um, but now I'm the age that my dad was when I went off to the show. When I went off to San Francisco the first time. And Pedro in my head is still, he's still, he's still a kid. He's always going to be, you know, he was, and I'll get through again choked up. He was my little brother back then, and he's still with my little brother now, but we'd be old, and that would have been fun.
What sticks in your mind from his relationship with Shawn and the commitment ceremony?
Well, that was fun. That was really just, it was so fun and lovely and romantic. And it was, um, I should tell you from the other point of view, because this gives good context. Um, so George Fisher and Bob Fisher, who were the directors on the show, before the commitment ceremony, they gave everyone a pep talk slash warning, meaning not us, the crew, the camera operators, folks operating sound, boom mics, grips who are going to be walking around. Like he said, okay, we are not a part of this. There will be no crying. There will be no hugging. There'll be no reacting to anything going on. We are observers, and you guys stay out of it. And when it was all over, we got to talk to the crew, and they said that was a necessary free scolding, because she's, Billy Rainey, who later producer on the show, at that point was our chief sound engineer. Billy said like he's there, like holding the boom mic and like, you know, like just wiping tears away. And because it was beautiful. It was really, um, it was incredibly sweet. They loved each other very, very much, and they wanted to do this thing. They wanted to mark the moment. Um, and a small chunk was because it was going to be on camera. I think the smallest of chunks. I mean, I think the other part was that they were just wildly crazy about each other, and as an old guy and pre-combination drug therapy for the HIV/AIDS community, I think everyone has to understand that despite any medical advances that were going on at the time, everybody was living with HIV/AIDS at the time knew it was you were just you were maybe sitting on a bomb, that everything could be fine and then everything could not be fine. That as much as Pedro would say that I'm living with AIDS, um, the specter of illness, the specter of death was always kind of there. So a lot of times there were things like there's no screwing around. We need to do this. We need to do this now. I need to live. I need to live my life. I need to do this. So um, that was present. Like why do this? Like, well, why not? Because it's beautiful, and they want to do it. And we were very proud, and it was fun, and so exhausted when the day was over. It was funny. Um, a lot of the show, it's an unspoken thing that when the cameras are on, you're aware of it, so your adrenaline's just a little bit higher. It's a little bit higher. And with this, the camera piece was taken out of it, and there was like a little bit nervous because they were treating it very seriously. They really were feeling like it was a commitment ceremony. They were getting married. They were very serious about that. This wasn't just like we're going steady. They really meant it. So everybody was pretty nervous. Um, meaning Pedro and Shawn. For us, we were nervous because we just wanted the day to be beautiful, and it was, and it was great. It was great.
Oh, really? What a milestone. Like, I have seen it so many times, and still the goosebumps that I get every single time I watch, because it's just I don't know, such unbridled joy that you can see on everyone's face.
Yeah, and it was. I gotta tell you, it was real. That was the beautiful thing, that here we are a million years into reality TV, and like so much of it's bullshit. But this was early days, and this was also d- d- deeply true and honest and beautiful and romantic, and a million years ago in 1994,
Yeah.
where when they did TV movies about gay men, they had to look at each other longingly and maybe hold hands. That's about as much as we got. And you know, Pedro and Shawn were in each other's arms, and they kissed and they cuddled, and they were, and they got married. It was nice. It's wonderful.
I know one of the concerns that Pedro had was about moving to San Francisco and, putting some distance between himself and his family. And you describe in the book how you kind of talk him through it. How much of that was, kind of like hanging over the whole season? Like how often did that come up? And how did you talk Pedro through his concerns about that?
Oh, it didn't come up at all really until the very end.
Hmm.
Um, it's like it is almost as if the thought hadn't occurred to him that he'd be leaving home, and I hadn't thought about that either. Um, I mean, it's not, again, in hindsight, I'm not this big worldly guy. I was 24 years old, but I'd gone off to college. I'd left my family. I'd I had almost moved on with my life. I graduated, spent a year away, went broke, had to move back here with my mom and dad, and then I got to go in the real world. So that was great. Um, Pedro was similar in the sense like he always wanted to go off to college, but he gave that up because he wanted to stick with activism and education for at least a while. So this was him leaving home for the beyond the most significant amount of time. He had never left home before. He'd gone on vacations, work trips, that sort of thing. But this was 6 months moving away, and it was kind of nerve wracking because he got sick a couple of times while we were there, and now he was gonna move away. And um, at first, I was really worried for him because he was so despondent about it until I realized what we were tapping into. It's like, oh man, Pedro, you're moving away from home. We all do it. You're just leaving home. And I know part of it, what he was worried about, and some of it would come to fruition, and it's ugly and horrible. That part of it was it's worried about, like, if I get sick, what happens? Um, and there was talk of that. It's like, well, if you get sick, you have people here. You have all of us. You have this enormous support system. He said, yeah, but I don't know if my sister can come out here, and like logistical things like that, little things, big things. But it was just a young person leaving the home for the first time. Um, but what sorry to laugh. What helped was not very shortly after that, the show premiered. And then a whole bunch of confidence came in because, the entire planet Earth was paying attention to him there. And that was so cool. Walking when he couldn't walk around the streets anymore without people recognizing him, especially in San Francisco. Um, if he was homesick in that moment, it kind of got tucked away for a little while because he was incredibly famous and people were all over him, and it was great.
Do you remember the conversations during the show? You described it a little bit in the book, that you're having with Pam about Pedro's health, because you know that, like, you described the adrenaline, like, the toll that takes. Like, how much were you talking, to each other about his condition?
A lot, and we did that off camera. Because I didn't know anything, and I didn't feel comfortable asking Pedro tough questions about his health. And I would ask Pam, a couple of times, to the point that, it was hard for her because, and I had to understand that he's not a patient. You know, this is her friend, and she can A, only know so much, and B, only intercede so much because this is his life. He's not under her care or anything like that. And she was a medical student at the time, by the way. She's not a doctor. She's studying it. The first patient she lost was when she was in medical school, was someone who died of AIDS. Um, so this is not unknown to her. And also she was a brilliant student who would later become a brilliant doctor. And she saw all the warning signs and she didn't like it. She didn't like what she saw and what she understood. I mean, everything that would happen was something that I'm not going to say that she foretold, but his weight loss, the opportunistic infections that he got while we were on the show, these were all bad signs. And it is the one calculated thing that she and I did in this way was we didn't talk about it on camera that we thought he was having health problems. Um, in hindsight, it wasn't something that we were necessarily hiding from anybody. You could see if you watch the first episode to the 10th episode, you could see that he was, he was getting thinner and, looked a little more drawn, and it was hard. But we had at first kind of unconsciously decided that we weren't going to talk about it on camera, like, because he had said several times that he didn't want this to become, the expression I gave him, he didn't want it to become the movie of the week. He didn't want the sickly AIDS boy. And I told him, like, yeah, the movie of the week. Like, what is that? He not huge on popular culture. And I described it for him. I said, yes, I don't want that. And I don't want it to become like, a special episode of television where we talk about this once or anything. He wanted to show himself living. And that was his goal. That was his mission. And he did that. So we did talk about it a lot, but just to ourselves.
And you went from, at the start of the season, not having a lot of firsthand knowledge, certainly, but not having a lot of knowledge about HIV and AIDS, to, within a year, you're delivering talks about it. That's such a huge shift. And I'm curious, like, how much you learned from Pedro from going to the talks and going to protests and stuff like that, and what it was like to be in that role so quickly.
Oh, well, you said it right there. I had a really good teacher. I mean, a really exceptional teacher. Um, this is the thing that is acknowledged, and it cannot possibly be understated. He was a naturally gifted communicator, which, as years have gone on and I've watched more and more, again, we were living through these moments, so you're not even cognitive of what's going on, but he had this ability to break it down very simply, very succinctly, deeply honestly, and sometimes brutally. Uh, beginning with the social politics around AIDS, the emotional toll it can take on the community, what he was experiencing. Like he was really enormously good at that. And that was the first person who was talking to me directly about it, you know, often. Um, and then if we're just talking about just like the nuts and bolts facts and figures about living with HIV and contraction and whatnot, I just gone to a number of his talks, and again, watching him talk to people much younger than me and keeping it, and he wants to keep it clear and honest and very clear. He's not hemming and hawing around his language. You know, he's talking about anal sex and oral sex and condom usage and just and blunt isn't the word, clear, because that's what he felt he needed when he was 13 and 14 years old. He needed someone to talk to him specifically about sexual acts and what was dangerous and what wasn't, and how it contracted and how he didn't contract it, honestly. So, he had said, like, if we have to talk about penises and vaginas and penetration and breakage, and we need to talk about these things honestly and clearly, and tell young people, it's like, no, a hand job is safe. Digital manipulation is safe mostly, but let's get specific. I mean, just things. So this was my first experience with it. So when Pedro was supposed to go out on a lecture tour and talk to young people about AIDS and HIV, and he asked me to sit in for him, he quickly went through like, what are you going to talk about? Like, I think you should tell them what it's like to know me and what it's like to know someone like me and my story, and then tell them your story. He said, and then give them AIDS 101, like, the facts. He said, which are you clear on your facts? And him walking me through, like, well, no, say it like this, say it like this, like, like a 10-minute pep talk. Like, okay, you got it, you got it, you got it.
What do you remember of the feedback that you heard from viewers about him, like as the show's airing and then afterwards?
Well, it's really fast. I mean, it's like, it's hard to even, the tsunami that happened after the show. Just to get to the calendar of it. We moved out of the house in June, and by August, Pedro was hospitalized for the first time, and he would never recover. He came out of the hospital for a little bit, but he went back in, and he passed away in November, the morning after the last episode aired. So we had this very brief window of pure elation when it was so much fun, where everything was supposed to be. That well, we had a wrap party, which for those playing at home is when you finish. I had to learn what a wrap party was. It's when you finish a television show or a movie, they have a party. They'll show blooper reels and shit like that. And we had a blooper reel, which was hilarious, a lot of fun. But we also got to watch the first 2 episodes, which we had not seen before. We hadn't seen anything yet. So here it was, our lives cut together with rock music and presented in the 3-act structure. And there it is. We're watching it on a semi-big screen in the house that we just lived in. And Pam cried hysterically. And later, she had talked about it, that she was so relieved that they told Pedro's story so well. She felt that after the first 2 episodes, like, it's going to be okay. They're going to do right by him. This is him. It's an honest portrayal. He comes across so well. It's going to be okay. And that's what we were so thrilled. We were so happy for him. And it was fun. He and Shawn couldn't walk the streets in San Francisco. They couldn't go 5 feet. Shawn said, we're going to need to get him a disguise. He's going to need like a beard and a hat. Because Shawn said, like, Shawn wasn't on the show much yet. So he said, I could like worm my way through. He said, but it was such fun. They went roller skating. They went to a roller night in San Francisco, and they got mobbed. They couldn't, like, Pedro was finally like happily shouting over everyone, like, let me go get my shoes. I'm going to get my skates. I'm going to go around once and then I'll talk to everybody. And this is pre-smartphones, this is pre-anything. So you got like people with like getting autographs or like actual cameras and shit. Um, and it was fun. It was everything it was supposed to be. Um, and we could feel it. Um, the show is gigantic. It was huge. You can't, I mean, for a very small period of time in the summer of 1994, uh, the cast of The Real World, were as famous as the cast of Friends, which would premiere that fall for a very brief period of time. And then that ended and Friends went on and we weren't so much. But there was a period of time where it was just as crazy as it was supposed to be. But the fun went away quickly because in August he went to the hospital, and um, after that it was just dealing with his health and not even knowing for the first couple of months there that we were going to lose him, and then we knew we were, and then it became something different.
He gave a talk where I think it was when he was talking to Congress, where he talks about picking up a torch and then he asks, who's going to pick up my torch?
Yeah.
Were you thinking at the time of the work that you were doing, giving the talks in his place? Were you thinking of your work as picking up his torch in any way?
No. And if we were here right now, or if I even could talk to him then about it, he didn't mean me, and that's okay. Um, it wasn't supposed to be me. It's what did I do? Um, and Pam, look, we were on television with him, so we were famous too. We were from the real world, and we knew him, and we had this brief, intense relationship, which I know because another one of my housemates I fell in love with married, and she's a part of my life every single day. So I also know that Pedro would have been a part of my life every single day. We were astronauts and we all went to moon together, and we're never going to lose that. So yes, there's a brief friendship. But um, I knew I could do this. It began something small that he got sick and I was going to fill in the lectures because he felt bad that he was canceling. That was purely just, I can't fulfill these commitments. And could you do a few of these? A bunch of them are going to cancel because you're not me, clearly. But can you do this? And it started something small. And then later, um, when years later, after we lost him, after he passed away, and it got too hard to keep lecturing, and I also felt like it wasn't really as effective as it could have been because I'm just like I'm going from college to college or high school to high school. I'm talking about him. I was like, what can I do? And it's like, well, I write and draw pictures, so I'll do this. I'll do a book. I'll do a cartoon book about Pedro. Um, so this was my lane. This is how I could help, and the only way I knew I could. Um, as far as what he meant about the people picking up his torch, he meant young people just like him. He meant, you know, other young people, you know, gay people of color who are living with HIV or maybe not living HIV or gay or straight in the community, outside the community. Um, those folks. Um, and if anything, what I felt and what Pam felt and what we still feel now that we're old is it was about helping those people, like finding those young people to carry Pedro's torch. It wasn't about us. It was about finding them because young people are the ones you're supposed to be talking to young people. That's who he meant. And it was our job to support those young people that he was talking to and talking about. That was our mission. Allied. It was the word I was looking for. Allies.
I know you've incorporated themes around HIV and LGBTQ liberation and all that stuff into a lot of your work, into your books. Can you talk a little bit about how you've worked that into the writing and the art that you've done?
Yeah, I always thought it was important to, well, beginning with uh it used to be called diversity, now we're calling it inclusion. All it means is like telling when you tell stories, you have people of all different shapes and sizes, like the people who walk the earth, that it's not all straight white men. And when I was writing superhero comics, it was, that's 99% of the characters are straight white men. Um, so I always thought it was just a little more honest, even though it's like a superhero stories. Like you've got characters who are from different dimensions and planets and universes and alternate realities. They're popping in there. Like, I think we can handle a couple of gay people here and there. I think we can handle a few more people of color here and there. Um, and I always thought it just made for just more interesting and fertile storytelling. And that was one part of it. Also, and what I thought and what we know is that when people see themselves in these characters, when they're all just white dudes, an endless parade of white dudes, young people reading these stories don't see themselves in the stories. And it is such a simple thing by just having an Asian person, a black person, you know, uh, Latino, gay, whoever in these stories, they just feel seen. I mean, it's become almost hackneyed when we use that expression that like I feel seen. But over the course of my life, I've seen it happen, and I still see it happen. I see it. I do children's books now, and I hear from children who like that I have these characters in these books, and they see themselves in there, and they just feel better. Um, so it was absolutely influenced by my experience knowing and living with Pedro and doing our show. Our show was like really, we joked about it. And a reference that might be lost on a lot of folks. Like we joked that we were the United Colors of Benetton. It was a very diverse group in our house. And from then on, when I told stories, it's like, you know what? I think this is a part of who I am in my life and, you know, how I want to tell these stories. So it's always been there. And I mean, I've taken a fair amount of crap uh, for that. It was like, being accused of getting on a soapbox. And it's like, no, it's like the fact that, I'm telling one or two stories that have gay characters in them, or I'm telling one story where a character tests positive for HIV and suddenly like, oh, makes everybody gay. All those stories that people have AIDS in it. Like it's like one or two. Grow up. It's mostly characters beating each other up with superpowers. That's mostly what the stories are. So, um, but more and more, I enjoy the fact that more, uh, more inclusive and diverse storytellers have come along. When I started doing this stuff, is again, it was a lot of white dudes, in like all aspects of what I was doing, even as a cartoonist and also as someone who wrote superhero comics. And that has changed, and that is cool, and that is fun, and it makes it all more interesting, and it makes a lot of people in the audience who's reading these, happier. And what's wrong with that?
I know, that there's been a lot of work in Pedro's name and in his memory, scholarships, fellowships, clinics, memorial funds, streets named after him. Um, what are the things that you are the most proud of, or that you think he might be the most proud of, as having been accomplished, directly in his memory with his name?
Talking as large and as wide a view as possible, I think he would be thrilled that his presence on the real world, him doing the show, did exactly what he wanted it to do. That even 30 years later, young people watch the show and are still struck by his story. Young people still watch the real world on Paramount Plus, and they decide to come out to their family. Um, I about 10 years ago, I spoke at UCLA, and it was fun. My book was part of like the summer reading list. So they read Pedro and me, and then all of them went online and watched the show. And I will get through this without getting upset. I met dozens, and I do mean dozens, like, 20 to 30 to plus young people who told me that after they watched him on the show, they came out to their families. These are 18 or 19 years old. And I won't get, Some of them went great. Some of them went very badly. Some of them were telling me that they don't, they're freshmen in college and they don't talk to their family anymore after coming out. It's 10 years ago, but um, he gave them the courage to do that long after he was gone. And it's still happening. People are still taking in his story and are still inspired by it. Uh, Inspired by the big, small things of maybe coming out to their family, inspired by the big, big things of maybe they embrace activism in some way and they want to help other people. Maybe they want to do as he did. Um, if they're living with HIV/AIDS, they want to help educate people. If they're not, they want to help educate people. If they're not, maybe they just want to be out about who they are and support other uh, young people who might be in the closet, might need help with that, or feel supported or seen. Um, so I think he'd be thrilled how far the community has come. Really, for all the setbacks and the fact that so much of the community is targeted again in new and shocking and horrible ways. Again, um, I think he'd be proud of that. Um, and small scale, our uh, our very good friend Eric Gisulo, who we met, Pam and I met through Pedro when we did the show, uh, who spoke for Shawn during the ring ceremony, the commitment ceremony. Eric became one of our closest friends in the whole wide world. He married me and Pam. He got ordained so he could marry us. So explaining how he's family. So, and I say all that to say this. So through the AIDS Memorial Grove here in San Francisco, there was a youth scholarship that Eric successfully lobbied and had changed to the Pedro Zamora uh, Leadership Scholarship. And every year we give out scholarships to young people who, at this point, we'll say occupy kind of the same vibe that Pedro embodied, because everybody's all shapes and sizes now. But these are young people who are in some way activists, who are trying to do something for their community or other communities, or making the world a better place in some way, shape, or form, and who are going to college. And we give them money. And it is deeply inspiring. There's like a lot of really amazing young people who weren't even born when we did the show. Um, and I think he'd be very, very proud of who we're supporting in this small, specific way.
Is there anything else that you want folks to know, either about Pedro or about the current fight against AIDS and HIV, whether, on a health front or education or stigma?
It's something I mentioned on social media in the anniversary of his passing, that I, like many of us, was uh, disappointed or shattered by the results of the election, and expected the world to be in a slightly better place and a little bit more hopeful than we had been in the past. But I know what Pedro would do is that he'd be up for the fight. And that is what we have to do. We have another set of battles ahead of us, that'll take on any form imaginable. The obvious ones being they still, conservatives are targeting the trans community and trans children, um, because they're monsters and they're making political hay out of something that doesn't affect anybody except the trans community, and monstrous. So we need to protect this community and these children. To much further that, are they going to go after gay marriage? They say they are. So we got to get our dukes up. And I don't know what that's going to mean or what's going to take on, but we can't be quiet, and we can't disengage. And we had to put our heads down for a couple of minutes, catch our breath, and now we got to get back in there. I don't know what that means. I don't know how we're getting back in there. I don't know what we need to do, but we can't pretend it's not happening. And I think what Pedro would want, as much as anything, is to realize, like, for a long time, for as long as, he had he wasn't around very, very long, but most of that time, it was a fight. Now he would fight a lot of times with kindness, uh, but and that is sometimes a very, very tough needle to thread. But we'll do what we can. But I would say if folks who admire him and are inspired by him, that we should not disappoint him. We need to stay right in here, and we honor the people that we lost by remembering them, and if to remember him means we're going to fight in his name still.
Well, I think that's a fight that a lot of folks are ready for, and I think it's a great credit to Pedro and to folks like you who are telling his story and keeping people aware of him. That's what helps make us ready for that fight.
I think so. I know so. I mean, it's a different era. I mean, it's really. I think also he'd be very, very proud. I mean, I have a lot of friends who were in ACT UP back in the day, and how radical that seemed at the time. And then, I mean, I think everyone was like, well, is ACT UP needed anymore? Like, I don't know if it's exactly needed, because just the person on the street's pretty pissed off and ready to get in there. They don't need to be under the mantle of a particular organization. I think young people will take to the street without having to be goaded in that way. I feel, again, I'm an old guy. So that said, in 2 weeks, if someone say like ACT UP is back, like, okay, yeah. Fuck yeah. What are y'all doing? where can I send money and t-shirts? Just tell me. Well, what do you need?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that folks are really ready for that, whether acting on their own or acting as part of a collective. I think that the time is particularly ripe for people to make, like you said, a lot of noise.
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave with just one thing that I stay hopeful for, even though this was like an enormous kick in the teeth. With every progressive movement in the history of the United States, there's been a massive conservative pushback, going back to slavery, with emancipation. After that, maybe you got to jump all the way to suffrage, when women got the right to vote. And then after that, there was, again, women in World War II who basically ran the country when the men were away fighting the war, and then came back and gave birth to the 50s housewife. And then the civil rights movement. And I mean, you can go on and on and on. Each time a progressive movement pushed forward, the conservatives pushed back hard. I thought the pushback was Trump's first administration, but apparently they're going to get two swings at it. And we're just going to have to work twice as hard. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think, it's a bruising fight. It's rough, but I think it's one that we've waged before, and we know what we're doing.
Yeah, no, and I'm grateful for the young people who are ridiculously pissed off too. Us old folks sometimes like I sit down a minute, like, okay, you can sit the fuck down. I'll get in there.
A little. I think a mix of the two is needed.
Oh, yeah.
The veterans and the newcomers.
Yes.
Judd, thank you so much for chatting with me and being so generous with your time and for sharing your story and for talking to folks about all this.
It's my pleasure, sir. It really was.